Hey, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I am really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Chaz Ebert, who's the CEO of Ebert Digital, publisher of the prominent movie review with RogerEbert.com. She's the wife of the late Pulitzer Prize winning Roger Ebert, and she's also written her debut book, It's Time to Give Effect. Chaz, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Richard. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
Well, tell me a little bit about what inspired you to write this book. I mean, was there a specific thing? Did Roger was part of the inspiration? What was part of the inspiration?
So Roger said that empathy, that movies are a machine that generates empathy.
Mm.
And so his whole mission kind of as a film critic was, how can being empathetic, putting yourself in the place of another, even though you're watching it for 2 hours on the screen, how can putting yourself in the shoes of a person who's of different race, religion, age, ethnic origin, socioeconomic class, cause you to understand that person just a little bit more? And that's what he thought cinema, he said, good movies, the most noble movies, help you empathize with the people who are sharing this earth with us.
Yeah.
And so in talking about empathy, Roger and I actually had started endowing some programs at various film festivals so that some of the film critics who had not been given super credentials or could attend film festivals. We also did it in Hawaii, in Telluride, at the Sundance Film Festival. Some of these actually I did after he passed away. But to Roger's talk about empathy, I said, okay, if you empathize with someone, what does that do? It causes you to develop maybe a compassion for them, and you want to help alleviate suffering they have, or alleviate some challenge, or maybe you have compassion and you want to help them achieve something they thought they couldn't achieve ordinarily. The way that you do that is through kindness, an act of kindness. So the compassion, empathy is putting yourself in their place. Compassion is feeling that you want to help this person in some way. And then kindness is the act. The F, the forgiveness, came later. When I wrote the book, it was not one reason, it was sort of continuing the work in empathy that Roger and I had started together. But I started thinking, empathy is not enough. You need more than empathy. You have to have some compassion. You have to do acts of kindness, but you also have to have forgiveness.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I love the title of your book. Can I ask you how you came up with that title? It's a little edgy. I like that.
Okay.
But who gets the credit for that title?
So the credit for the title goes to FEC, is an acronym for forgiveness, empathy, compassion, and kindness.
Yeah.
So I guess an acronym gets the title for it, but when we talked about FEC, I didn't want people to think of FEC you, as some people say.
Yeah.
I thought it's time to give a FEC. And then the subtitle is Elevating Humanity Through Forgiveness, Empathy, Compassion, and Kindness. So, and it is a little edgy. Richard, I was having dinner the other night at a friend's house, and one of the guests was a Catholic priest, and they were telling this priest about this book I wrote, and nobody wanted to say the title of it. And finally, he said, well, what is your book called? And I had to say, it's time to give a FEC, F-E-C-K. I said, FEC is a 4-letter word like love. Yeah. But anyway, that's the title of my book. It's time to give a FEC.
Tell me a little bit, before you met Roger, were you a movie lover? Did you know much about movies? What was your level of movie understanding and sophistication before you met Roger?
Yes, before I met Roger, I always loved movies. When I was about 9 years old, I think I took a course at a community center in my neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. And that is when I first learned that I first became aware that, I had watched movies on television at home with my family, But when I took that course when I was 9 years old, that's when I realized someone made this film. It didn't just happen. It's not that just that a lot of people got together and decided to act. I had never thought of it before then. That's when they taught us about a film having a director and a producer and, line producer and all these people who put things together, people who were, responsible for the crafts table and everything.
Mm.
And so from that time on, I was curious about the movies. I always liked them, but I also liked theater. I guess I was between both visual, I was an avid reader. So I loved reading. But I loved seeing what I read come alive, whether it was on stage or screen. So when Roger and I got together, we both were avid readers. We both loved theater. We both loved movies. We had a lot in common.
Yeah.
Oh, and opera. We both loved opera. Our first date was at the Lyric Opera in Chicago. And I think we saw Tosca.
Funny. Well, how did Roger really change your view of movies? I mean, did he kind of open your eyes in a way that, I mean, obviously him being a professional movie critic, I'm saying he brought a certain lens that maybe you hadn't looked at movies before.
Well, I can tell you what he brought for me is he taught a class on cinema at the University of Chicago. And when we were dating, I used to go to his class. That was, I just knew that one night a week he taught, I think it was one night a week he taught, and that was the class that I would go to. And I loved it because he had students from all over in his class. I still run into people today who took his class, and they tell me how it actually enriched their lives. The thing that I loved about Roger is his level of curiosity. He was very curious and open to ideas, which is actually the sign of a brilliant mind, I think.
Yeah.
And so I used to both travel with him when we would go to film festivals or when he would speak at cities around the world, really, not just in this country. And then when I watched him bring back what he got from other venues and bring it back to his class, I thought, wow, they're really lucky. He's not only giving them an academic view, he's giving them a very pragmatic view of the film industry and of thoughts and and that movies and that things can have consequences as well.
Tell me a little bit about the documentary. I read your forward in your book, and I know that doesn't sound like the documentary that was the documentary that was made was not the one that was intended to be made.
You're right.
What was your feeling about it, how it came out in the end?
Yes. Well, when Steve James first approached us about making a documentary about Roger's life, this was in December of 2012. And, Roger he was using a computerized voice. He had lost his ability to speak, but he was doing very well at the time. I think it was in 2006 that his cancer had returned and he had some catastrophic illness. He had been in a hospital almost a year. But in 2007, 2008, 2009, we were, everything was going well, and we really thought Roger had a long time to live after that. So Steve James came, sat down with us, told Roger his vision of doing the film. And Roger said, we've been approached either 2 or 3 times. And I told them no, because who wants to see a film about a film critic? He said, I just said no. But the way that Steve outlined it was something that seemed interesting. So he told Steve James, yes. Also, Steve James, the other names involved, he said, well, Marty Scorsese is going to be an executive producer. Garrett Bash gave the book to Steve Zalian, who won an Oscar for writing Schindler's List. So these were all very serious filmmakers that Roger admired. And so he said, yes, we'll do it. Shortly after that, Roger had to go back into the hospital, and then he ended up passing away in April of that year. Wow. So the movie that Steve James intended didn't he didn't get a chance to film that. But what he did, I think he did a beautiful, lovely job with life itself. And I'm really glad that we have that film. Although I have to say, while we were shooting it, it at first it felt a little intrusive because Roger was in the hospital most of the time that he was shooting it. And then afterwards, I just, I don't know, I was grieving. And so it was very difficult for me to think about watching the film. But by 2014, when the film debuted at the Sundance Film Festival, and I watched it with my daughter and my son and my grandchildren, we were all sitting together, holding hands, and we cried together and everything. But it was cathartic. It was beautiful to have this document of what Roger brought to film criticism. And I'm really, really grateful to Steve James and to everyone of his, cast and crew and the producers for that movie. And Roger would have been really pleased with it. He never saw the whole film, but Steve James used to bring some clips to the hospital so that Roger could see. And Roger said, yeah, we'll give it the thumbs up and say, yeah, go ahead. There was one part of the film, though, that you see in life itself where Roger's having some sort of medical procedure on camera. And he waited until I was out of town before he called Steve James over to film that, because he knew I would have never said yes to having that in the film. And
interesting.
When I look back on it, however, Roger is right. Roger said, I don't want him to do a film that I wouldn't want to see. I don't want a puff piece. I want you show the man, warts and all, and whatever happens. He said, people spend too much time hiding illness in this society. And that's not what we should do. Illness is a part of life. Death is a part of life. It's something that we should become more comfortable with. So.
I mean, on one hand, obviously, if the movie had been made earlier, Steve could have made the documentary he was waiting for. But on the other hand, if he'd waited too much longer, it wouldn't have happened at all. So
yeah,
really,
exactly.
In some sense, his timing still was pretty good. Well, do you think, I've watched Roger in a lot of his interviews. I mean, he just seemed like something that was just sort of very brutally honest. I mean, you kind of just touched upon that now, even the way he wrote the documentary. I mean, is that pretty accurate? Was that what he was like in real life, and as the way he was when you saw him on TV?
Yes, he was. He was. I mean, he could be diplomatic when he needed to be, but one of the funniest clips to me when I watched he and Gene Siskel on some of their past TV appearances. I don't know if you ever saw, I think they were on like the Johnny Carson show. And oh God, what's his name?
The Chevy Chase?
Chevy Chase, yes, that's it. And the Three Amigos. And I think it was a movie they didn't like. Maybe they gave it thumbs down. And Chevy Chase was talking, and Johnny Carson was saying, oh, I want to ask you, is there a particular movie you didn't like this season? And you could see that neither Gene nor Roger wanted to say it, but they had to. They said, well, you asked, we have to answer. I'm sorry, Chevy Chase is sitting here, but Three Amigos. And oh, you could just see they really didn't want to say it right while he was there. But they felt, as film critics, they were always honest, and they had to be, and they were ethical. I mean, there were so many things that I admired about what they did and the way they did it. And you don't always see that today.
Yeah, interesting. Have you had a chance to read this new book that just came out about Siskel and Ebert, Opposable Thumbs? Did you think that was accurate? What did you think?
I did read the book, and I am having Matt Singer at our Ebert Fest Film Festival. April 17th through the 20th in Champaign, Illinois. It's the 25th anniversary of our Ebert Fest Film Festival. And I said, what a beautiful way to tie up some of that
Yeah.
by having Matt Singer with the opposable thumbs. I
Yeah.
thought that he did a good job. And I know he did a lot of research. And he told me that he went through a lot of dark nights of the soul as he was writing it because he wanted to make sure he got things right.
Yeah.
And, I think he did a good job. And he's going to be one of our special guests at the Ebert Fest Film Festival.
Huh. Did you learn anything from that book that you didn't know about Roger?
You know, no,
Okay.
I didn't learn anything I didn't know, but I have to tell you, I kind of, I've read through the book, but I did it quickly so that I would know, I could get an opinion
Yeah.
about whether I thought it was a worthwhile book or not. And so I
Yeah.
read it enough to know that, sure, I thought he did a good job. But now I want to sit down with the book and sit down with it in more detail
Yeah. Yeah.
to see if there's anything that I disagree with in
Yeah.
the book, for
Yeah.
instance.
Interesting.
So,
What is it about me when you first met Roger? What was the thing that really kind of, what was really the chemistry? Obviously you knew who he was. Obviously, you know about the movies. It sounds like you talked about movies, but was there something a little bit even deeper than just that subject matter that really resonated between the two of you?
so I will tell you the first time I realized that maybe there was something there. We actually met first at an AA meeting, and he was there with Ann Landers,
Huh.
and he had taken her because she used to write an article called 20 things about 20 20 tips about AA or something. She used to write a little pamphlet, and so she asked Roger to take her to an AA meeting, and they were there. And I was walking into the meeting, and it was maybe all the chairs, just about all the chairs were taken, and somebody pushed a chair out for me to sit in, and I sat down, and I turned to say thank you, and it was Roger, and he told me that when he saw me walking to the meeting, he thought I was so beautiful. He wanted to make sure I sat next to him. So he put the chair out in the aisle for me to sit down. And I look and I think, oh, Roger, what is Roger Ebert doing at this meeting? And then I look, what is Ann Landers doing at this meeting? So we all went out together after that to talk. And as we were speaking that evening, I noticed everybody else stopped talking and they were just listening to Roger and I talk back and forth
Huh.
because we were talking about some plays we had seen. We were talking about some books we had both read recently, and everybody was just listening. And then we both stopped and said, why aren't you joining in with us? And everyone said, nope, it's more interesting to just watch you two talk. So, and it was, but I still didn't think there was anything. There was nothing there, but he did. He, I think he asked for one of my business cards. I was practicing law at the time, and he pretended he had some legal work that needed to be done, and he just wanted to get my number. So
An age old trick.
then he called and asked for a date later, and I was, I had watched them on TV just like everyone else, but
Yeah,
I never
right.
really gave a thought to dating or that this could be my husband one day or anything. In fact, when I watched them on television, in the beginning, I liked Gene better, Roger. I thought Gene's points were better.
Oh no.
Once I got to it, oh my God, he was the kindest and so smart, brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant man.
Yeah.
A very forward thinker, um,
Yeah.
just kind and considerate
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
people, and then we fell in love. And
That's so much. Well, one of the things I know, one of the interviews I've watched Gene and Roger do a lot of interviews, and one of the interviews, I can't remember which one it is, but Gene said the one thing he really respected about Roger was he is such a good writer. Obviously
yes.
everybody can review a movie and talk about a
Mhm.
movie, and that's fine. But Roger's way of writing, he said, is something that is just inimitable, and he really respected that about Roger.
And he was right. I mean, some of the things he writes just makes me swoon.
Mm.
I love that he left such a beautiful body of work here for us to still enjoy. And in the movie Life Itself, some of Roger's editors from the Sun-Times talks about how he sometimes thought at the same speed of typing. So he's typing and thinking and writing all the time, and then comes out with some of this brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
And the thing that, even though as smart as Roger was, he knew that, he said, when you write, especially if you write for the newspaper, don't write to convince people about how brilliant you are.
Yeah.
Write to relate to the people that you're writing for.
Yeah.
And so, you know, people would say Roger wrote for the common man or the common person, the person. Roger said, if you're writing for the newspaper, you should be, the people who are paying money for that newspaper should be able to understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And even though he wrote for books as well as for the newspaper, I think his books are, the brilliance of some of the books that he wrote is also that he wrote them in a way that they could be understood by everyone. Even if they were written brilliantly, there's just this undertone of, he wasn't a show-offy writer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of writing, tell me a little about how it was writing your book. I mean, people, every author I've interviewed says writing is so much harder than it looks. What about for you? What was it like, and was it harder than you thought it was going to be? What was it like?
Richard, so I have written my entire life. I cannot not write. I have just notebooks and notebooks of writing from going back years, because I've always written, even in grade school and high school, but I didn't write with the notion toward publishing. And as I was a trial attorney. So, you know, as a trial attorney, you're also writing. That's a different kind of writing. Legal writing is different.
Yeah.
So between writing maybe like a journaling kind of writing or writing, I used to write some creative stories. I've written, I used to compose music for some of the stories that I wrote, everything. So I've always written, but I never wanted anybody to really read my writing. So when I sat down, and it was Roger who said, you know, some of the things that you talk about and you lecture about, you actually should put together in a book. And I started thinking, yeah, I don't want to. And to tell you the truth, one time, to watch Roger write, he wrote so quickly that he would make me angry, and I wanted to throw his computer out of the window. We sat one time with back-and-back computers, typewriters, not even computers, typewriters.
Yeah.
And we thought, oh, wouldn't it be romantic if we sit in a room and we write, compose together? But he was so fast that I wanted to take his computer and his typewriter and throw it out the window. But toward the end of his life, when he was saying, you should write some of these things. So I started writing, but I didn't really write seriously until some years after, because after he passed away, I think there was a period when I would think thoughts, but it was harder for me to put them down on paper during my time of mourning.
Well,
when I started writing the book, I'm glad that I had some people surrounding me, some people who worked for me, and my daughter and son. They would encourage me. They said, no, there is real value. And I had a book collaborator from Canada who said, there's real value in what you're writing about. Please don't stop. How many people, I said, who wants to read about compassion and kindness? I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing to people. They said, no, you're not lecturing. Just use some real stories of people. And then I thought about the time that I got to spend with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, both in South Africa and in America, when we invited him to come to accept the Abraham Lincoln Leadership Prize. And he told me that when he and Nelson Mandela were putting the Truth and Reconciliation Commission together, that forgiveness was such a big, big part of it, that he said that he lost a lot of his friends during that time period because they didn't want them to forgive people who had committed atrocities under apartheid. And he said, but if you don't forgive, you remain in a prison yourself. He said, forgiveness is as much for you as it is for the person that you're forgiving. So I learned a lot about forgiveness from Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Would Roger have been pleased about the book? What do you think he would have said?
Oh, he would be thrilled. Roger told me, he said, you're going to be doing some things when I'm not here. He said, and you're going to be doing them in front of an audience. And I hope you keep an empty chair for me in the front row because I'll be there cheering you on.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah.
That's
So,
nice.
yeah.
Well, Chaz, it's been wonderful chatting with you, and congratulations on this wonderful book. I wish you all the success. And when you finish some of those other great projects, please come back and tell me about it.
I will. Thank you. And I'm just going to say it once more time. It's time to give effect, elevating humanity through forgiveness, empathy, compassion, and kindness.
This is Richard Hsu and Chaz Ebert. Thanks.
Thank you.